Craig Foss.
Mr Speaker, absolute pleasure to follow the Honourable Paraku Horomia, because anyone that follows, it doesn't matter what I say, it will make more sense than what we've heard over the last 10 minutes. I suppose there was some revelation there, though, Mr Speaker, that I think Labour are looking at privatising the frigates or something, or skyrockets, or you're trying to Monday-eyes Guy Fawkes Day or something. What are you up to? Focusing on the issues that matter, I guess, over there. Mr Speaker, Happy New Year, Mr Speaker. Happy New Year to colleagues in the House. It's 2011, and I'm sure members opposite will join me in backing the ABs this year. I'm sure they will, because like them, I'm backing the All Blues. I'm backing National, and I'm backing the other ABs, the All Blacks. Rugby World Cup year 2011, and the Honourable Paraku has joined me in backing the other ABs, the All Blues, this year for election year 2011. Mr Speaker, I must put some things straight. I've heard screeching from the other side about borrowing for tax cuts or something ridiculous. Mr Speaker, there was a tax switch which kicked in last 1st of October and some balance on 1st of April this year. A tax switch. Yes, there was revenue lost from making more fair and equitable the PAYE rates, and then the losses of revenue there was picked up by increasing GST, by changes to LAQCs, which the members opposite seem to have suddenly discovered, and various other changes to depreciation, etc., etc. So the fiscal cost, both sides of the balance sheet, Mr Speaker, of the tax changes introduced by this government and implemented last 1st of October and this coming 1st April, were actually fiscally neutral. So to hear from the other side the various screeching that is borrowing for tax cuts or something somewhat absurd is exactly that, Mr Speaker, just absurd, Mr Speaker. I've heard some other points from the other side I need to correct for those listeners out there, Mr Speaker. Early childhood education spend by this government is the highest on record. $1.4 billion, the highest on record. The Minister announced another $100 million just the other day. So somehow going from $400 million to $1.4 million over about the last 7 or 10 years. And to be fair, the other side did bring a lot of that into place, but somehow they construe that as cuts. And I just don't know how they get there, but it does demand further work on numeracy and literacy standards, Mr Speaker, because they just cannot even work it out. Another point, Mr Speaker, in the Mr Honourable Phil Goff's speech earlier, he talked about an ECE, and I think he said there had been a 10% increase in Pacific Island children participation in early childhood education under the last few years of the Labor government. He's wrong. He's totally wrong. There was a 10% increase in various forms filled out, and enrolment forms by various institutions. In fact, one child or the parents of one child could have in fact filled out many, many forms. In fact, the actual participation rate by child in the Pacific Island sector in particular, because the member brought it up in his speech, was actually basically stagnant, appalling, even with the increase in fiscal spend on early child education. And I do note, for the record, Mr Speaker, how quiet the other side has gone once the brutal and the hard facts actually hit the floor. Mr Speaker, in 2011, National will continue to focus on those issues that matter. Continue to focus on those issues that matter. The other side will continue to disguise themselves, I guess, as tinkering and reshuffles of the fresh new faces of Labour. But even Mr Goff is somewhat of a slow learner, because I understand in his speech he did not move a motion of lack of confidence, if you like, it's traditional for the Leader of the Opposition. So after 26 long years in Parliament, he didn't even get that bit right as the Leader of the Opposition. He's still learning. Maybe another 26 years will get going, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, 2011, we're going to continue to rebuild the New Zealand economy. Continue to rebuild it after the demolition job of 9 long, wasted, fiscally rampant years of the previous administration. However they try to reinvent history, Mr Speaker, the numbers speak for themselves. The decade of deficits, thousands upon thousands of New Zealanders abandoning this country, moving offshore. The previous speaker's numbers were absolutely wrong on migration, Mr Speaker. We will continue to reallocate resources from head office, from headquarters, from bureaucrats to the front line, Mr Speaker. We've found $4 billion of savings so far. That's $4 billion that doesn't have to be borrowed, that doesn't have to be raised via taxes. $4 billion of better allocation of taxpayers' hard-earned money, Mr Speaker, exactly as householders have to do every single day. We will continue to keep interest rates lower. Do you recall, Mr Speaker, members will recall, mortgage rates hit 10% under the previous administration. They're nowhere near that under this current administration because our prudent fiscal management, Mr Speaker. Borrow and spend, borrow and consume, the game's over. No more, it does not happen. We will continue to constrain the growth of the government sector, which constantly crowds out the real sector that creates real jobs, real incomes for real families. We will keep an eye on spending, new spending, Mr Speaker. If you recall, the Honourable Michael Cullen had about $2.8 billion of extra spend each and every single year under the administration. $2.8 billion. Well, we've actually brought that down to $1.1 billion, and now we're targeting $800 to $900 million. Still huge money, but this is on top of us discovering and reallocating $4 billion within the economy. We will continue to get more value from each and every single tax dollar, and we will treat it as preciously as every single household has to. For example, Mr Speaker, we are open, we're transparent. I congratulate the Honourable Bill English on the investment statement on the accounts of the Government of New Zealand. For the first time, some hard numbers where we can make some hard perhaps, or difficult choices on the allocation of scarce capital, Mr Speaker, which is basically borrowed. Mr Speaker, I agree with the Honourable David Cunliffe when he said, just before Christmas, just before this House rose, and I quote, that we need, New Zealand, I quote, to unleash state-owned enterprises to create and grow new subsidiaries with private partners and shareholders. That was but 50-odd days ago. What's changed? What's changed? I agree. We should unleash the awesome potential which is in our balance sheet, because when we allocate capital in the wrong place, that means not a development of a hospital or a health. Mr Speaker, I cannot understand. I don't know if Mr Goff agrees with this. I appear he doesn't. Maybe it's part of the leadership stuff going on there. I don't know, Mr Speaker. But I cannot believe why they are opposing such thing. Why the Labour Party are opposing the ability for New Zealanders to invest in their own future and their own assets. Why are they opposing the ability for New Zealanders to have a model to invest in 20, 30, 40 years for their own future? Why are they opposing the ability or changes proposed to allow KiwiSaver accounts to allocate investments within these borders? They set up a KiwiSaver. Good on them. Claim it. But now they are not allowing it to be all it could be. Why would they do that? Why would they do that? I don't understand, Mr Speaker. They did introduce it, to be fair enough, and watch this space. We will be concentrating on savings and investment and a better management of every single taxpayer dollar this year, Mr Speaker. But I guess it's part of the confusion why they're proposing it, because Mr Goff now says it was all a mistake, the Labour asset sales of the 80s and 90s. Yet he had, the previous administration had 9 years to buy them back. They did not. They had 9 years to buy back the assets which they say was now a mistake which they sold back then. Best economic times, they blew it, Mr Speaker. I won't go into too much detail of how facetious and how lack of integrity that particular observation from the leader of the opposition gave us. Mr Speaker, the world has changed over recent years. Spend, borrow, consume has changed. It's no longer an option. It's no longer an option. The global financial crisis, the global recession, has put a brutal focus on countries' balance sheets, both private and public, the total debt by country, and the creditors are watching, like it or not, they are watching very, very carefully. And if this government is able to do what the Prime Minister outlined in his speech, to start to bring the spend down, to bring back more efficiency to the taxpayer's balance sheet, then, Mr Speaker, we will be in a much, much better place and begin to build a much better and stronger economy. Thank you, Mr Speaker.